Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody had a good night last night and we're ready for day 2 of our lectures week. So this morning, we're looking at different techniques that your level 3 students would use. So we're going to be looking at ganaches, some decorating of our chocolate molds, and also the things that we use to decorate. So like the cocoa butters, the shimmers, and different things that are very easy to use to make really beautiful products, but you don't have to use spray guns and things like that. Because a lot of the techniques that we see when we see the chocolatiers making these beautiful different decorations is they've used a spray gun. But there's loads of ideas that we've got that you can use that is very simple and doesn't need much equipment, which is always good. So we're going to start off just looking a little bit at the ganaches and what we would do. So we have got some PowerPoint slides that I'm going to show you. And again, we'll share these later with you. And also, I've got a couple of books that might be quite useful. So with this one, we've got 2 here. Jean-Pierre Wybauw, I'm sure you've all heard of him, but he wrote some brilliant books. I'm not sure if you can get them still, like this, in the hardbacks. When we've had a look on Amazon, they've disappeared. But he has got a new book out, which we haven't got, called Gold. And that's got all of these books in one book, and they're really good. So if you wanted to know about recipes, we're going to be talking about shelf life. And in his books, a lot of his recipes have got shelf life on them. So, I don't know, I've just turned onto a page with saffron, and the saffron has got a 0.78 shelf life. So we'll talk about that in a bit. But it's really handy to have some base recipes so that you can then play around with those recipes, but you've got an idea of what the shelf life is. But also, if you want to look into it more, extending shelf life and things like that, he's got a whole nother book that talks about extending shelf life. So that one's really good. What can you do with the recipe? When you have a recipe, how can you think about changing it? And if you are interested in the shelf lives, we have got a course coming up in March with Alexander Bordeaux. And he's an expert on everything to do with shelf life. So he's actually doing our first paid course this year. And he's going to be looking at how you develop your recipes, how you change them, what ingredients do you use to extend the shelf life, how can you look at a recipe and say, okay, how much water has it got in, how much fat has it got in, how much alcohol has it got in, and what are the effects of that going to have on the chocolates? Because most people just think, oh, I'm going to become a chocolatier. And it's great, I've just got to make some chocolates and I can sell them. But as soon as you start selling those chocolates, you really need to know how long the shelf life is and how long the customer has got before those chocolates go off. And also, when we make chocolates, we leave them at room temperature. So often when we make our normal ganache, just a 1-to-1 ganache, what happens with that is if we left it out at room temperature, you'll see within a couple of days, especially in a warm kitchen, molds start to grow on that ganache. So we don't want that happening. You know, I think Beverly, who used to work in the academy with us, said she used to be worried about eating chocolates. She would always cut them in half first because, you know, when she had chocolate sent into her, she had one once that she bit into it and it was full of mold. Because once you've got that shell on there, you can't see. So that's why shelf life is really important. So those books are really good to have a look at. Okay. So are we going to go on to some slides?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So when we talk about making ganaches, there's different ways that we can make a ganache. So again, if I was talking about that 1-to-1 ganache, we often boil up the cream, melt the chocolate, mix the two together. And if you do that, that's fine, but you haven't got a tempered ganache. You've got an untempered ganache. So that first method there, boil the cream, pour onto melted chocolate, and it's great. So if we were using it for a cake, you know, to layer up in a cake, or if we were using it for biscuits, anything like that, it really doesn't matter because all we have to do is let that cool down, and when it gets to the right texture, we can use it. And if we were using it for glazing, we would want it to obviously be able to pour over the cake. So that method is important. But it's not very good when it comes to making chocolates and the shelf life, because that's very unstable. Yesterday, when we were talking to students, we were talking about the crystallization. We need the crystallization of the chocolate shells, but we also need the crystallization of the ganache inside as well. So the second method, heat your cream up to 80 degrees. and pour it onto your chopped or your cullets, onto your chocolate whole. Because what happens here is we've boiled the cream, so we pasteurized it, and then we cool it down to 80 degrees. And then we pour it over the chocolate that is solid. So what's happening there is the heat of that cream is melting the chocolate. And what should happen is when you finish mixing that cream up, you should end up with a ganache of about 32, 33. So again, we know that will crystallize because it's below 35 degrees. The third method is to boil your cream and leave it to cool to 30, 35 degrees. And then melt your chocolate and equally leave that one to cool to 30. And then we mix them together. Now, when we mix these ones, we do need to use some like a hand blender or put it into a robo. You need some shearing so that you really get a good emulsification of your ganaches. So with that one, it is definitely tempered. So that's great. And then method 4, you make an untempered ganache and then you get some cocoa butter. So, you know, like the micryo cocoa butter, or we have a machine called a magic temperer or an easy temperer. And this actually, we put the cocoa butter into it, we leave it on there at 32, 33, and it actually melts that cocoa butter for us, but it melts it into like a soft butter texture. So lots of chocolatiers are using these now. They just have them sat on the side and they just leave them there. And then when they're coming to make their ganaches or their pralines or doing their tempering, all they need to do is take a spoonful out, 1%, and add it into their ganache and then give it a mix. And that's going to crystallize the ganache for us. So that's really good. Now, is there pros and cons to it? There is. If we have a tempered ganache, it's really going to help the flavor of our chocolate as well, stay for a long time. If we add a chocolate and we're only going to keep it for 1 week or 2 weeks, it doesn't really matter. The flavors would stay the same. But if you had a chocolate that had a longer shelf life, it's better to have a tempered ganache because it locks in that flavor better. It's not so open. So therefore, it doesn't dry out as quickly. It keeps the flavor and it keeps the texture. So the ones in the untempered ganache, it would be a lot looser. It'd be more prone to drying out and it'd be more prone to flavor loss. So if it's your business, that's what you want to do. You want to have a tempered chocolate. But if you're doing a big production, we know what happens when we have chocolate and it's being tempered. It starts to set quite quickly. Well, the same thing's going to happen in the ganache. So if we're doing 2 molds, 4 molds, that's fine. We can cope with our tempered ganache. But if you're doing 100 molds, often chocolatiers would like to use the untempered method because actually it's nice and fluid and they can pipe it into the molds and they can get them all nice and even quite quickly. So it is, each chocolatier would have their own way of doing it. The other thing is you often see in recipes that it says, make your ganache, pipe it into the molds, and then leave it overnight to crystallize. Now that again is okay, and that's lots of the older recipes have that in there. And what they're doing is they're leaving it overnight for those cocoa butter crystals to form, and so that you get a more firm ganache. And then you're going to back off your chocolates. But again, when we're leaving them in the environment, the yeast and the molds that are in the air, they can go on top of that ganache, and then you seal it. So sometimes if the air isn't very good or isn't very clear, when that yeast or that bacteria is on that ganache, it's got its food and it's got its water and it's got room temperature, so it can start to grow. And sometimes we see chocolates exploding, and often this is the cause of like the back exploding on the chocolate. So I think it's one of those things, you need to understand all of the different components of it so that you can make your own decisions. And if you're in a beautifully air-conditioned room, it's taking air in, air out, and it's filtering it, all that kind of stuff, then you could leave them on the trolleys and leave them overnight to set. That would be fine. But if you're in a bakery and you're just making some chocolates on the side and you've already got that yeast in the air and you've already got flour in the air and all those kind of things, then maybe that isn't the best environment for leaving things uncovered. You should use your tempered ganache and get them sealed very quickly. So it's just thinking about the methods we're using. So next one.
So on to ingredients?
Yes. Cool. So when we're talking about ganaches as well, you'll see all sorts of different ingredients in the ganaches. So we have glucose, invert sugars, sometimes sorbitol, dextrose, lots of different sugars, and all of those sugars have different reasons for being in the chocolates. Now, glucose it's a really good handy one to have around because the glucose is often used in the recipes. Now it will have a dextrose equivalent number on it, so you can get a DE40 or a DE60, and sometimes these recipes say that as well. And that will be to do with how much water is left in that glucose, again, when we're looking at shelf life. But also the role in this glucose is it helps bind all those ingredients together. It helps reduce our water activity, which is really important, and it helps soften the texture. Because if you imagine the texture of glucose, it gives us that like chewy texture almost. If we didn't have glucose in there and we just had the cream, the ganache and butter, we'd have more of a bite that left your teeth marks in it, whereas the glucose gives you a softer texture. So glucose is really important. I mean, we use it in lots of different pastry things already, but it's very good in our chocolates. Stops them recrystallizing. So again, over time, if you just got free sugars in there that you put caster sugar into your ganache, and then over time that might recrystallize in the chocolate and you get a bit of grittiness in the ganache. And that happens because it didn't have the glucose in there. So you often find glucose in the recipes. And then the other one that you find a lot in the recipes is invert sugar. Is that the next one? Yeah, invert sugar. So invert sugar is a simple sugar. So it's got the fructose and the glucose in there. And it's very difficult to make it yourself. It's, like an enzyme reaction. They put some acid in with the sugar and they split it. So they get this lovely invert sugar. Now, the relative sweetness you can see on the slide there says 125. So invert sugar is more sweet than sucrose. So when we look at sugars, you'll get a list. And again, in the Jean-Pierre Wybauw books, he's got all the different sugars and all their different sweetness levels. So some would be sweeter than sugar. So they'll be 1.25, 1.5. Some wouldn't be as sweet as sugar. So they would be 0.5. So again, when you're looking to change recipes and you're thinking, well, actually, I've already got a caramel in that recipe, so I don't want the ganache to be too sweet. Well, then I'm going to look for a sugar that isn't as sweet so that I can take away some of the sweetness from my ganache. So you start playing with the sugars. And also, it really helps bind things. So we know we use invert sugar sometimes in cakes because, you want actually to keep the moisture in the cake, especially if you're making a travel cake or something that's got a month's shelf life. You often find that invert sugar is in the recipes because it absorbs the moisture. It helps keep the moisture locked inside things. So again, it's really useful in the chocolates. And the brand name that lots of people know is Trimoline, but Trimoline is just a brand. There's lots of other different invert sugars. And it's also got quite a creamy texture to it. So again, it helps in our ganaches. And then the last one is butter. So butter is very important as well. And depending on how you put the butter into the recipe will depend on the texture you get from that butter. So when we look at butter, most butters are about 82% fat. And we often use dry butters. So the butters that you would use in croissants or things like that, that often gets used in chocolate making as well because that's got even less moisture in it. And again, when we're looking for the shelf life, we're trying to remove moisture from anywhere that we can, but still have those ingredients with the same creamy texture or the same like glucosey texture. So it's really good, the butter, because we get a nice flavour with the butter as well. And we also get that nice mouthfeel. So when you eat a butter ganache, it really just melts in the mouth. It's really, really lovely. But it adds structure. So we're going to add some fat into a ganache in a minute, and you'll see the ganache without the fat in there is really split and it doesn't look that nice. So in ganaches, you can often have too high a fat or too low a fat, and that really affects the glossiness and the smoothness of your ganaches. It reduces the moisture absorption. So again, from pulling sugars and pulling waters from other places, the butter helps us get a nice round ganache. And it has creamy products, so it has a creaminess to it, and it helps our shelf life. So if we just got chocolate, you can just do some ganaches where you take chocolate, fondant and butter, and you mix the chocolate and the fondant in the machine, and then you add in your butter to it. And it makes a Swiss kind of ganache. And those ones, they just pipe into little rosettes, and then they dip them. But that's got a really long shelf life because it's just got the butter in there, it's just got the chocolate, and it's just got the glucose, but it has a really nice mouthfeel. So again, when ganaches were first made, we've only really started doing ganaches in chocolates quite recently, like 1960, 1970, those kind of times. Before that, what actually went into the chocolates was more like a fondant or a syrup solution. So if you think back to your Fry's chocolates, they had that white fondant inside that was fruit flavoured, didn't they? Your peppermint creams, the violets, I can't remember the name of the violets, but African violets, those kind of chocolates were all sugar-based. They weren't ganache-based. So ganaches were originally invented for pastry. And then we thought, well, that's very nice, and we can put that into a chocolate. And so that's when it started evolving into the chocolate world. And now we see ganache more in chocolates than we do the fondants, because our tastes have changed.
Would you be able to use ghee instead of butter?
Yeah, no, ghee's a really good one as well. And that has some of the water taken out of it as well, doesn't it? So it is good for the shelf life. So yeah, ghee is a good alternative. Yeah. Okay, so this big topic of shelf life, like I said, it's one of the most often asked questions we get in the academy. Can you just tell me the shelf life for that, please? And unfortunately, we can't. So, like I said, you can get a recipe and you can have the shelf life AW reading. So an AW reading is something that is called available water. So in a product, we need to look and find out how much water is in that product, and that helps give us an idea of shelf life. Just got to open this, it's noisy. And so when we're looking at it, we're looking at how long under normal circumstances would that chocolate stay safe to eat and also be nice to eat. Because like we said, when the moisture dries out of the chocolate and you get a really dry chocolate, it might not be that good, because we want a chocolate to taste as good as it does on day 1 and day 2 as it does at day 30, 40, 50. I mean, sometimes when you're going into supermarkets and things like that, you have to have shelf lives of at least 6 months, because otherwise it's really hard for the supermarkets to stock your chocolates. So when you think about the chocolates that are in the supermarkets, there's lots of caramel-based chocolates, lots of alcohol-based chocolates, or there's fat-based chocolates. So all of those, they don't have high water contents. Or there's pralines, you know, like the seashells. And again, the praline doesn't have a high water content. So you suddenly see why you're getting a lot of these chocolates on the shelves. Because what can happen is we can get molds, we can get bacteria, and they can start to decay the ganache. So another thing is we can give you the AW reading for your ganache, but we don't know what you've done in your workshop. So is there anything else around? You know, the cleaning agents you've used, are they good? Is there any chemical interference in the ganaches? Is there physical interference? You know, yesterday I was cutting off piping bag bits, and, you know, like, do we know that there's nothing in our ganache? So there's different things that we need to think about when we're thinking about shelf life. And also we need to think about molds, bacteria, and yeast. Now they all start to form at different levels. So first of all, we get our yeast and our molds, they come along, and later on it's bacteria. So it's much later in the shelf life that the bacteria comes into play. So we do have this little machine that helps us. So this little machine here is a shelf life reader. It's a water activity. And it's a tiny machine, and it costs us about £1,400, Claire, I think it was? Yeah, something like that. But they use this in the food industry. So they would use this for frozen products. They would use it for cakes, all sorts of different things, to find out how much moisture is in that product. And then if it's cakes, it helps again, say how long it's going to stay nice and moist. If it's a frozen product, it's how much ice is being taken on into that product. And we don't necessarily want too much ice. But for us, with ganaches, we want to read the amount of water that we've got in a ganache. So we have this little metal pot, and we fill that till about 3/4 with ganache, and then we're going to place it under the machine. So the machine has, if we go to the top one, Claire, I can show that underneath. Yeah, so the machine has a little area here, and what that's going to do is it's going to read the moisture. So we take the little vessel that's got some ganache in it, and we place it underneath. And we turn it over, and this isn't going to read anything, but we press it on. And then we press it again, and that is going to start reading what the shelf life is under there. And it starts moving around. So at the moment, this should be really good because there's nothing in there. So we should get an amazing shelf life. But it takes a couple of minutes. And when we're testing the ganache as well, we want to test it at the temperature that the chocolate's going to sit there. So if it's sitting out at room temperature, we want to test that ganache at room temperature because that's when the water is going to be most active. So that'll just carry on going. And so that's given us one part of the story. So that's given us how much water is in that recipe. But it's not telling us whether that water is free or bound. This is going to actually measure the free water. Because if we made a syrup, if we made sugar and water, and we made a supersaturated syrup with it, that's not got available water in there. That's captured water. So that's not a problem. When we make a caramel, again, caramel's got sugar and water, and then we cook it to a really high temperature. When it's cooking, we're evaporating that water. So we're getting rid of the water. So then when we add in our cream and our butter and we recook it again, we've got one that's locked the water into the product. So again, that's quite a good one. We also need to look at other things in there, like other products that you're putting in. So yesterday we spoke about herbs because lots of people use herbs in their ganaches. So make a nice rosemary or basil ganache. So that could add in, if you put that into your cream, that could add in bacteria into your ganache recipe if it's come straight from the garden or it's come straight from a packet. So often, again, we use dried herbs or we use oils. So we get the the natural oils from rosemary or something like that, and that's much safer to use in a ganache than it is the fresh herbs, unfortunately, because they're much nicer to use. So you do need to have a look at what's happening in there. So my little thing's still going round, and it's telling me it's 0.31. So we've got a shelf life. Yes, we have. So this is a little indication to tell you where your shelf life is. So at the moment, this one's saying 0.31, so it's amazing. So that is going to give us a chocolate that could sit on the shelf for about a year. So if we think of some things like marzipan, like I said, that's got a really high shelf life because it's just sugar and it's just almonds. And it's really quite dense and dry, so that will last for a long time. If we do some of the nougats and things like that, again, they will have a really low shelf life because, again, of all the sugar and it's been captured and the water's disappeared. But when you start getting into ganaches where you're adding creams and butters and fresh produce, that's where we start getting to the 0.65, 0.7. Now, if you've got that, that's amazing. That's 6 to 9 months, but that's really quite hard to achieve. Normal ganaches, when we're making them artisanally, is about 0.85 to 0.7. It's in that range. And so 3 months is an average life of a shelf life for a chocolate. But that 0.85, that's where you'll find in that one-to-one ganache. It's 0.85, 0.86, all those kind of things. So, just take a sip of water. So that's really important, that we know where our ganache is. Because again, if a health inspector came to check us, then we need to have some answers for that person. So how do you know what your shelf life is? I just think it's 3 months. They want to know more than that, because if they ever got a complaint, then they would come and investigate you, and they would investigate how you're making your ganaches, how you're recording it, and how you're working out your shelf life. So AW is one thing. That's great. But I could get an AW of 0.65 and tell me I've got 6 to 9 months. But if somebody in that kitchen had used a dirty spoon, or they'd put a dirty spoon into the glucose and then put the glucose back in the cupboard, and that glucose had become contaminated, this AW reading wouldn't tell me that. It wouldn't tell me whether I've got any bacterial problems in there. So that's when we then have to send it to a lab, and they do shelf life testing. So again, lots of our chocolatiers would actually make their new chocolates, their new season's chocolates. They would send them off to be tested, and they test them, on bacterial count, but they would also test them over time. So they would take the chocolates and they would test it after 1 month. They would test it after 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. And so it does take quite a while for them to actually get, say, a 6-month shelf life certificate. So yeah, shelf life is really, really quite difficult. But it is a really interesting subject, and there's so many different variables to it that it's really difficult when someone just says, can you tell me the shelf life of that? And we're like, we can give you an idea. We can give you the AW reading. That's your starting point. And then the rest of it, you have to work out yourself. So it's quite hard. It's a bit annoying when people don't get the answers from us. So that one's beeping now. So that one's telling me it's 0.29, which is quite good because that means we haven't got too much moisture in the air as well. So that's the little AW meter. You can get all sorts of different shapes, but and some just use probes. There's lots of different ones, but that's the one we use. Just turn it off. There we go. So, Ganaches. What can we do with them? How can we change them? So when we're looking at a ganache, we are looking at what we can do. Can we infuse them? Can we add oils to them? You know, there's lots of different things we can do. So we're going to show you a Earl Grey tea ganache here. And this one was from Marc de Marquette. He did a course here, and it was beautiful chocolate and had an amazing taste to it. But we've looked at it, and we're experimenting today. So we decided that we want to make it vegan. So we've looked at the recipes that we've got, the ingredients that we've got in there, and we've had a look at what we can change. So in the recipe, there was orange zest, lemon zest, that's fine, cardamom, ground cinnamon, star anise, peppercorns, and vanilla. So lots of things in there to give us a really lovely taste. And also we've got black tea. So you'll get this recipe. We've got black tea, but we're using Earl Grey because we want to give it a bit more flavour. And then we've got cream. And then we did have butter in there and honey. But of course we want to make it vegan. So we're taking the honey out and we're adding maple syrup in. And we've taken the butter out and we're adding olive oil in. So we've just changed it up a bit. But the olive oil and the butters, even though we've tried to keep the fat content the same, it is different. You know, there's no getting away from it. The butter has a different structure to the oil. And also the butter is a saturated fat where the oil is an unsaturated fat. So the movement of the fat inside the ganache is different as well. And then we're going to use dark chocolate. We're going to use one of our plantation chocolates, which is Madrefolo, and that's got really lovely limey, zesty notes to it that will go really well with the citrus. But the cream in here, so we're using the Elmley plant-based cream for this one. So I'm going to pour it in, and we're going to bring it to the boil, and then we're going to strain it. So if I was going to do this one and it wasn't a quick dem like we're doing now, I would have boiled this, say, last night, and then I would leave it with the things in there to infuse overnight. Or you might want to leave it for an hour. You would have a test. But when we're doing cream, just checking it's plugged in. Plugged in? No. Okay. So when we're doing cream and tea, what we have to watch out for is that tea is going to absorb the cream. So we want to infuse it, but then we're going to have to strain it, and then we're going to have to reweigh it. And I'm going to need some scales. So I'm just bringing that up to the boil. But also when we were talking about the ganaches earlier, remember we said that we wanted to temper it. So I can bring it to the boil to get all that flavour in there and release all those oils and the aromatics from the herbs and spices. But then I'm going to have to cool it down. And then my chocolate as well, I want my chocolate warmed in the microwave or on a Banbury, however you do it, but then cool that down as well until I mix the two together. So we've added the Earl Grey tea, but you could add all sorts of different fruit teas. Now, if you wanted to really infuse your cream, the best way to infuse it without getting all those tannins coming through is to infuse it at 60 degrees. Because if you take it and you boil it, you know what it's like with a cup of tea. The more you boil something, the more of the tannins come out of that tea, and it totally changes the flavour, which is not very good. So we often use the Thermomix for that if we're infusing things, and we put the Thermomix on, set it at 60, put our herbal teas in there or our fruit teas, and let that really sit there for a while and really get the flavour into the cream. And then we would strain it off. So my cream in here was 180. So I'm going to strain it off, and then I need to check the weight that I've got left. So I'm just straining it, giving it a good sieve, and you can see that a lot of that, I mean, I've done that really quickly, haven't I? But if you left it a bit longer, even more would disappear. So just getting all the cream out. And then I'm going to place it on there. Give it a good strain. Now, if you wanted to, you can change this back again. You could change the cream back to whipping cream, and you could change the oil back to butter. But we can't help ourselves, can we, Claire? But again, you know, like by veganizing it, as we just said, that changes the shelf life often on something. So again, if you've changed the recipe, you need to check again that the shelf life is the same shelf life. I'm just going to pour it back in. Okay, so I had 180, and now I'm at 130. So you see, I lost 50 grams of the cream. But that goes with anything when you're infusing. So just make it up again. 180, lovely. And give it a mix. So that's cooling down my cream now as well, and the fact that I've moved it from container to container is also cooling it down. So then I've got my chocolate. Behind me. So I need to put this into the microwave and just soften it a little bit. I told you yesterday, this room is so cold, we can't change the air conditioning on it. So everything kept setting solid really quickly. So it's the same. So I'm just going to melt the chocolate just till it's just melted. I don't want any heat in there. And then I'm going to mix the two together. And when we do this for ganaches, we're going to emulsify it. And it's really important that we emulsify, because if we don't, this is another thing that affects the shelf life. So if you have a chocolate that's untempered, it's not going to have a long shelf life. Also, the ganaches can keep moving and changing texture over time. If your ganache is tempered, we get the longer shelf life and we get the smoother texture. One more go. Okay, any questions there? Oh, they're all asleep still. That's good. No. If I don't know, I'll get Claire to answer. Yeah. So ganache is one of those things that obviously our life revolves around the ganaches a lot. And, you know, like when we're even thinking about the different chocolates that we're going to use, some of the chocolates would be more acidic than other chocolates. So this one, the Madrefolo, is quite an acidic chocolate. So we have to take that into account as well, because obviously acid splits the cream and can often split your ganaches. So we do sometimes as well test your ganache or test the chocolate to see what the pH of your chocolate is. So, you know, like if you're making a ganache that's always worked with one chocolate and then you change it, you're like, well, that's always worked. Why is it changed? If you've gone for an origin or a plantation chocolate, it might be to do with the acidity. And we find we've got one chocolate, a Tanzania chocolate, that splits, doesn't it? Yeah, it's got a great flavour, but it's quite difficult to work with because not only does it split, when we work with it, it over-crystallises really quickly. Again, because it's an origin chocolate, that's the characteristics of the chocolate. And it doesn't have any lecithin in there. So yesterday when we spoke about the fact that we put lecithin into chocolate, lecithin helps stop the overcrystallization happening quickly. So I'm going to pour my cream into here. I hope it's going to be big enough for me to use the hand blender. Make sure you get all the cream out because there's not a lot of cream in the recipe. And then I'm going to add in my chocolate. And then I'm going to emulsify. Now, you could do it in a RoboCoupe. RoboCoups are really good for emulsifying your ganaches. The Thermomix is really good. Food blenders, anything like that that's going to give you that high shear is really good. So now I'm just going to mix the two together. But what you'll see is at the end, this is going to be quite thick. And this is what we were saying about if it's a tempered ganache, it's not quite as fluid as if I had hot cream and hot chocolate. But I get a nice shiny ganache. Okay. Sorry. No. Yeah. Trying to get all the excess ganache. Okay. Just going to unplug that up. Okay, so like Claire said, you've got a lovely shiny ganache, but you've not told me two things, Claire. What have I missed?
Oh, it's two extra ingredients. Yeah, we need to put the olive oil and then syrup.
So when you make the ganaches, you often add the butter at the end. So again, like you make sure you've got a nice emulsion and then you add in your butter. And you add in your butter when your ganache is about 32, 33, which this one is. And then we're going to add in our maple syrup as well. And then emulsify. That's better. So yeah, so you can see it's lovely, shiny, glossy. And we've got a good, so what they say is you've got a good core to that ganache. Okay, so I've got a piping bag. And we've already lined some shells. So I'm going to pour it in. And then again, when you're piping into your shells, if this ganache is too warm, you need to cool it. So, like we spoke about it yesterday, but our room temperature is 21. We want our moulds to be about the same temperature, room temperature. So if you've had them in the fridge, you need to bring them out to warm them up. And then we're going to add our ganache in. But the ganache, if it's warmer and you pipe it into your moulds, obviously you're going to untemper that chocolate. And so what happens then is you won't get them out of the mould. You'll be like, but I tempered them, they were beautiful, I saw the shine. And it's another, when you're investigating what's going on with the chocolate, that could be a problem if your moulds bloom afterwards. Okay, so just cool that down a bit. Just going to cut the end off, and remember you need to know where that end ends up, out the way. And then we're just going to pipe in. So again, you can see that lovely, shiny, glossy ganache. Now, we're going to back off the chocolates later. So what we're looking for here is that when I tap, it flattens out, and you don't want it, too high. If it's too high, when we back it off, you're going to see the ganache. If you don't get a really good seal on the chocolate, again, that's going to affect the shelf life. And you don't want to do that, where you get bits dribbling over the edge. Because if you do that, again, there's going to be a little hole. Even though I'm going to clean that off, there'll still be a little bit of ganache on the top of that chocolate, and that gives an area for air to get in, and it's not good. And if you were doing caramels and things like that, if you have a bit of caramel that goes over there, caramels are the hardest ones to make sure that they don't leak out, and anything like that with a caramel would be really, really bad. So I'm just going to scrape it off. Because we don't want that. But like I said, there's still, making it worse, there's still a little area where that will leak from. So I'm going to put them to one side to set. And then we're going to look at other ganaches as well. So Claire's split a ganache for me.
I was really good and I split my
So that's really bad, isn't it? I'm sure we've all seen that. But when you split ganache, there's obviously a fat or a heat imbalance. Something's gone wrong with that ganache, obviously. And what we look at is, what were the ingredients in there? Were the fats too high? Has it had too much butter in there, too much oil in there? Is that what's causing it? Or was it the heat? So did we really heat the chocolate up high, really heat the cream up high, and mix the two together as well? That can split the chocolates. Was there too much acid? Did you agitate it too much? Because again, ganache is an oil or a butter in water emulsion. So we have really small droplets of butter and we have really small droplets of water. So that fat, if you agitate it more, those small molecules, they come together and they make a big molecule, and then the water can't go around it. And that's what splits as well. So is it that there's too much fat in there as well? So again, Claire, you did have some photos of ganache as well.
I've got a question as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Can we use basically the olive oil and butter, or will this crystallize?
Well, the butter and the olive oil is better because it's softer. So, even though butter does go really hard, you always make sure that you haven't got a huge amount of butter in the recipe so that it goes back to that solid. But the olive oil as well never really sets solid, whereas the cocoa butter will. The cocoa butter will recrystallize, and so it will set quite solid. Now, sometimes we do add cocoa butter into ganache recipes because we do want that. The other ingredients in there, we know they haven't got enough structure. So by adding a bit of cocoa butter into your ganache, you are adding some structure into your ganache. So it's not a no, but it's not a straight swap. You have to think about what's happening with the other fats in your ganache already, and whether they are going to set, whether they stay at room temperature. So, like praline, you can make a really easy praline center to go into a chocolate by just taking the praline and adding 1% of your softened cocoa butter into it, giving it a mix through. And then when you set that in the chocolate shell, when you bite it, you have got those little teeth marks. It does give you that bite because you've added some structure into that praline. And again, you can make some really quick and easy petit four fillings by, adding some cardamom or adding some spice in with the nuts, and then adding that cocoa butter in, and it sets it. So that's a way that I would use the cocoa butter inside my ganaches or inside my fillings. Now, with this ganache that I'm going to try and rescue, oh no, there's some really bad ones. Yeah. So what did you make here, Claire? I can see your camera in that one.
Yeah. So this is when I was preparing this. I did this on purpose, honestly. So it was looking at fat balance and when basically you oversaturate the ganache with fat to force it to split, and where it's just overwhelmed by fat. So the one on the left and the right, the really bad one where you can see the reflection of the foam. Like the oil is left almost like oil slick on the top, where it just will not emulsify into the rest of the solid ingredients. So that's where, like Julie said, all the particles they can't take on anymore. So you have to add like a bit more liquid, something like that in, just to increase almost the surface area so that the fat can attach to other molecules and particles. And then the other one, which is not quite so bad, is almost like it's just an imbalance. So looking at, is it too much fat, is it not enough fat, and then how do you address that? So you have to sort of go and look at the recipe, think, right, where am I losing that fat to water and solids and things like that, and then sort of have a go. It's not necessarily very easy to decide straight away from looking at it that it's too much fat, it's not enough fat, it needs more water, it needs... The hot and the cold is the easiest, but that's where I was start guessing.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah. Okay. So I've just warmed my ganache up a little bit, just so that I can actually add the oil in because it was setting. Now, as Claire said, if we know that when we added the fat in, then it split, and it looks like, you can see it looks like an oil slick, so that you know that that's fat-based. This one doesn't look like that. This one looks quite dry. So we haven't got enough fat in this recipe. So I'm going to add some in, and not add it all in at once, just add it slowly, and then make a core in the middle and give it a mix. And you can see it's starting to come back. I'm going to add a little bit more in. And, you know, again, if it splits and it's fat-based, you've got too much fat in there. So therefore, you need to correct it. So then you can get some hot water and take a new bowl and add a little bit of ganache into the new bowl with the water, mix the two together. And it's a bit like when you make mayonnaise. You know, when you split a mayonnaise and then you have to get another egg yolk and you have to make another emulsion. Well, it's the same thing. Same thing's happening. So again, you can see that this one's coming back and it's starting to look a lot glossier. Now, if I wasn't doing this on the dem like this, I would have this in the RoboCoupe. So I would have this in something that's really going to give me a really good shear. And you find then as well, that really helps to bring the particles back and the smoothness. What do we reckon? 2, Claire? Both? Keep going. I'm going to try to go to the stage where I add too much and then it will split, and I'll show you the too much fat. So again, you can, like I said, you can split it because you've added it too hot. And if that happens, you need to cool down your ganache and let it sit, you know, like on the side, or put it into the fridge and let the ganache start crystallizing around the edge of the bowl. And then you would take that and you would put it into a RoboCoupe and you would blitz it, and that could bring back your ganache. If it was a fat-based split, then you want to lower the fat. So you're going to get some hot water, just a couple of tablespoons, and then you're going to add your ganache slowly back into that water, and then just keep doing it again and really emulsify in between each one. And then if there's not enough fat, obviously you need to add more fat in it to bring back that shine and bring back that gloss. So that's that one. So most ganaches you can fix, and it's with the high shearing and it's with agitation that will bring it back. But like I say, if you do too much, then you're going to break it again. You know, like you can over mix the ganache and then you've broken that molecule structure. So therefore your water and your fat molecules are too big. So that's why it splits. Okay. Move that out the way. Right, so any questions on ganaches? Okay. So we're going to go on to decorating. So there's lots of different things. Oh no, just before we move on to decorating, I just want to show you these ganaches. So these ones, when I was just talking about too hot, can you go to the top? So you can see that quite well, can't you? So that really split. So this ganache was for a cut ganache, and it was too hot, and it had started to split. So we poured it into the frame anyway, and it's not good. It's not made a nice ganache at all. But there's no gloss there, is there, at all? It's really dull. And you can see it's got that broken texture. And if you think about eating that, that would be horrible. So again, we wouldn't have put it into a frame normally if it looked like this. We would have cooled it down. We would put it back into a RoboCoupe, and we would give it more agitation and bring back the structure before we added it into the frame. Because this as well, if we making for cut ganaches, you need to make sure you've got a really good emulsification, because otherwise when you try and put the guitar, when you try and cut it through a guitar cutter, it won't work. It's often too soft and no structure, or it goes like this, very fatty and very hard. And then the next one is not emulsified enough. So again, here you can see that there's different colors, can't you? And again, it's not necessarily got that shine. It's okay, we could get away with this one, but again, the structure of the ganache isn't very good. So again, if I was looking for something for a long shelf life, this wouldn't keep the nice smooth texture that we want in a cut ganache. It would start to go drier and crumblier quicker. So we don't like that. So not emulsified enough. You wouldn't believe how difficult it is to make faults. You know, when you don't want to make a fault, there's hundreds going on, but as soon as you want to make the faults, things don't split properly. And we were doing the decorations, and we wanted to make some bad decorations, and even they wouldn't work. We were like, let's put loads of heat on there, loads of cocoa butter, so it's really thick, and they still came out the molds. So who knows? But when we look at decorating, there's different things that we can use to decorate. So we can use cocoa butter colours. So this is a solid cocoa butter. But when we put it into the heat cupboard, or if you wanted to use it, I fill a jug with hot water, boiling water, and place it in there. And then that will start to melt the outside of my cocoa butter. Now, there's so many things that you can talk about cocoa butter and how to get a shiny mould and how not to get a shiny mould. Everybody's got a different theory. From what we can see, it's cocoa butter. So you need to still give that cocoa butter some structure. It still needs to crystallize, because if that cocoa butter is untempered, we saw what happened to the untempered cocoa butter. It will set, but it sets crumbly. It doesn't set in a good structure, and it certainly doesn't have a good shine. So if I was using this and it was solid, I would melt it till it was half melted, and I'd still got the solid tempered cocoa butter in the middle, and then I would give it a really good shake. And by doing that, that's really cooling down my cocoa butter, and it's giving me something that I can use. If I'd kept them in the hot cupboard, or in the auto sham or something like that, and they were at 40, 45, what I would need to do is pour that out into a container. And some people do it over ice, but what I'd need to do is just cool it down. So I'd need to put it into a container, and then I would need to keep stirring it, give it agitation. So a bit like when we think about chocolate and tempering, we need time, agitation, and movement to create the crystals. So I would keep doing that until I came down to about 32, 33. And then I would look to use my cocoa butter. So again, it's a different way of tempering, isn't it? So you've heated it up, and then you're cooling it down, and then you've given it agitation as well. So therefore, we're creating the crystals again. These ones are called power flowers. I don't know whether everybody's seen them, but we get lots of different kinds of power flowers. You get the natural power flowers, you get the azo power flowers, or you can get the sparkling power flowers. And these are really great. These are just as it says. They are little flowers, and you can break them into quarters or halves or whatever you want, and they are really intense colour. But if you see this colour chart, you can make whatever colour you want if you have the primary colours of your power flowers. So if I wanted to make purple over here, so for this one, I would need 1.5 red, 2.5 blue, and then some white power flowers. Now, you can also use it into white chocolate, so you could really colour your white chocolate really easily. So again, if you were doing Easter eggs or into moulds or something like that, you can really make lots of lovely colours. If you wanted to, you could use these into plain cocoa butter. So if you just had some cocoa butter collates, you could make your own colour cocoa butters by using the power flowers. And again, it would be a bit of an experimentation, because if you wanted to do a purple, you know you need blue and you need red. You need more blue than you need of the red, and you would mix them till you got the colours that you wanted. So that gives you such a wide range of whatever you want, and you can do so many different shades, because often when you buy them, they are, you know, definite colours. Now, there is some controversy around the white one at the moment. The white cocoa butter colours have got titanium dioxide in them, and at the moment, France has banned titanium dioxide. So it's just doing a preliminary 1-year ban to see what the effects are while it's doing more research, because it's saying that the titanium dioxide is causing irritation inside the stomach lining, you know, because they're really small particles and it's getting in there. And titanium dioxide isn't everything. So the poor French pastry chefs and chocolatiers can't use it in any of their colouring anymore. They also, your toothpaste is full of titanium dioxide. Chewing gum's got titanium dioxide. You know, when you start looking at it, there's loads of different products, because it's used as a background colour to give more depth to colours. So it's in lots and lots of different things. So at the moment in this country, we haven't got to worry about that, but I wouldn't be surprised if we follow suit. Although now it's Brexit, I'm not sure. Maybe we will, maybe we won't have to go with the Europeans. But at the moment as well, natural colouring is really big. So we've got our natural power flowers here. And so what they are, they're from natural origins, obviously. So the yellow one is from turmeric. So that's a turmeric colouring. The red one is from beetroot. So we have a nice beetroot colouring. And then the blue one is from spirulina. So they get that from an algae. So they get the blue colour from spirulina. So they are all natural, totally natural. And so they can be used in the same way for decorating our eggs and that kind of thing. But there is a difference. So when you look on Instagram, you see those really high shine, really brightly coloured chocolates that come from Russia or America or anywhere like that. They don't have the same legislation as we do in this country over colouring. So here, we're really tight on the amount of colouring you can have in things. So when people are doing really bright red or really bright yellow or things like that, and they're not natural, it's against the law, basically. But no one knows this, you know, no one gets told it. But I know that there's been a few macaroon shops and things like that in France. They've been shut down because their macaroons were so vibrantly red. The amount of colouring you would have had to put in there to get that red colour, it's bad for us. Do you know what I mean? We should just use as little as possible just to give us that colour that we need. Another thing you can do is you can add shimmers. And the shimmers are these little pots here, and they don't look like they've got a colour to them. But this one is a green shimmer, and it gives kind of a green tinge, but it's very light. Or we get the creative powders. So like this one is a red, ruby red creative powder, and then it gives us more of a intense colour. And so we have red, the ruby red, the copper, the bronze, and the gold in the creative powders. And then we have green, silver, gold, and blue. I haven't got blue there, in the shimmers. And again, these are great for chocolates. So if you haven't got a spray gun or anything like that, brushing these into the back of the moulds gives you a really good effect. And again, it's really easy to do. But when we do it with the brushes, we like to use the makeup brushes because they're much softer and they give a much better coverage. So we used to use the brushes from B&Q, you know, like the thin paint brushes and things, and they just don't give such an even coverage as quickly. So yeah, watch out everybody, the big blusher brushes, they're needed. So we have lots of different brushes, and what we try to do is keep the one brush for the one colour. I know that's difficult, but we try to do that so that we don't have to keep washing them. because again, if you have to start washing your brushes, they all start to come together and it's not very good. And I'm getting it everywhere. Powder, yeah. When you do start shimmering, it does go everywhere. You know, like you start brushing it, and especially on a sunny day, you see all the shimmering particles in the air. So yeah, watch out. And if you're doing lots of it, I would wear a mask. It's my health and safety. And then we have these, which are creative sprays. So again, if you couldn't do spraying, I can't spray in here because I'd set the fire alarms off. But you can just shake these cans and you can spray them into your molds, and it gives you a really good effect. So this is, again, this would be the creative scarlet spray. So there's lots of different ways of giving colour without having to use the spray guns. Okay, so I'm going to colour some chocolates up now. So I've got my trusted toothbrush. If we're doing decoration, again, we don't want to buy expensive equipment, so a toothbrush is a really good thing to use. So I'm just going to get Claire to go and get me some cocoa butter colours. I'm going black and red, Claire, please. So we keep ours in the hot cabinet. So again, I've had to keep it warm because otherwise in a room like this, it's going to set instantly. The other thing we use when we're doing it is we pour it out onto paper or onto a piece of plastic, just something like that. Because if I poured it out onto a plate or if I poured it out into a bowl or something like that, it's really difficult to get off. And then the bit I don't use, I want to be able to put back into the bottle. Because again, these things, I mean, they're about £12 a bottle, I think, for the cocoa butter colours. But that's still quite expensive. And you know, if you've got all the students using all the different colours, they soon run out. Okay, we've changed it up. I've got an E-free pink one. So we've also got a range that are E number free as well. So I'm giving it a shake. I'm making sure I've got my finger on the top as I'm giving it a shake. And you can melt these in the microwave if you wanted to do as well. But if you do, make sure you open the lid when you put it into the microwave, because otherwise the bottles end up exploding, and that's not good either. Now these E-free ones, I don't know whether you can see at the bottom there, it's quite dark, and at the top it's quite light. So you really need to give them a really good shake, because they haven't got the preservatives and things in them keeping the colours together, and they're natural. So give that a good shake. The other one I've got is black. So again, I'm going to give that one a good shake. So whenever we're doing the moulds, we've got to think about what would we like to see first. So whatever you would like to see on the top of your chocolate, you need to make sure that goes in first. So we're going to splat with a toothbrush, and then we're going to let that set, and then we're going to put a swirl on with some cocoa butter. So I'm putting some gloves on, because the cocoa butter goes everywhere. And again, if you've got tables, put some grease-free paper underneath or a bit of plastic, something like that, to stop it flicking everywhere as well. So I'm going to go with black first. So I'm going to pour some out, and then I'm not going to use it straight away. I'm going to give it a bit of movement. So I want to just move it around a little bit, so I'm creating the crystals and I'm cooling it down. And then before it sets too hard, I need to start flicking. Just get it so you can see. So when I do it, I want to pull my finger across. So you pull it across and you can see that it flicks straight down into the molds. But you can see I'm also getting it on the top there, which I don't want. So straight away, I need to clean that. So I get a piece of blue paper, or some kind of paper, and I'm going to turn it upside down straight away and give it a clean. So you see all of that black cocoa butter that's gone onto there. Because if I don't clean it straight away, especially if you're going to go back into white chocolate, when you scrape your molds later on, that is going to end up in your chocolate, and you don't want that. So you just want to make sure that it's nice and clean. And if you do it straight away, it's really easy. If you leave them and you let that set, what happens is then you've got all the little spots of cocoa butter on there. And when you scrape it off, little bits fall into the holes. So you don't want that. So you do want to do it straight away, give it a clean off. And then I'd let that set, which I think it has, Claire. We were saying, would it set in time? So I've done one that I've already flicked, just in case. And this time I'm going to add some pink on. So I'm going to give it a shake. Bring that paper over. And I'm going to put some more out. And so this time I need to work it a little bit. So I'm just going to go round and round with my thumb. And then I'm going to hold my mould and I'm going to give it a swirl. You can't see that one. So all I'm doing is giving it a swirl. I'll show you on the, where am I going? I'll show you on the next ones because I've done it in red so you can see. So I'm just doing half of the mould. So again, I just need my thumb, a piece of paper and some cocoa butter. And I'm making, and because you're doing it and you're pressing that thumb against the actual mould, what you find is that cocoa butter really sticks to the side of the mould and you'll get a really great shine. Sometimes when you're spraying, especially if your cocoa butter is a little bit cold, it doesn't actually stick really tightly to the cocoa butter, doesn't stick to the actual side of the mould. And so then you can often get them that when you turn them out, you're a little bit disappointed because they don't look that great. So again, I just need to clean it off because if there's anything that came on the top, so turn it over onto the paper and just give it a clean. And you can see again, you don't think that you've actually got anything on there, but there is quite a lot on the mould. So then, once I've got it, you can see it now, can't you, with the red in there. Once I've swirled it, so I've just gone round with my thumb and given it the swirl, you have to let that set. It doesn't take long, it's just, a minute or so. And then we can brush in with our shimmer powders. So with this one, I'm going to take a little bit and then just tap it out on the lid. You don't want too much. And then we're going to go into the mould. And you can see how quickly that gives a coverage. So then I've built up 3 layers. I've got my black splattered bits, I've got the red swirl, and then I've got the shimmer behind it. So it's really, again, it's quite easy, quite fun. And everybody gets the different colour cocoa butters. And although you've shown the same techniques, everybody comes out with a different chocolate, which is really nice. So with this one, again, it is good to do it on some paper because you can see that I've got the excess shimmer. And again, once it's on that paper, I can just fold the paper up and put it back into the pot so that I'm not losing any shimmer. Okay. So tap off any excess. So you can see, look, the excess that's come off there. And again, I can just pick that up now and put it back in the pot. And then I'm also going to do the cleaning it off as well. There we go. So now we have our moulds that are ready to fill with chocolate. So we showed the shelling yesterday, so we're not necessarily going to do the shelling again today, but I want to show you here 2 chocolates. Now, if you go top down, these ones you see here, they didn't have the shimmer behind them. So they have the black and they have the red, but because we haven't given it a real light background color, we've lost the color. So these ones have had the copper shimmer put in the back, and then you can really see the black dots and you can see the red as well. But what you can see, hopefully, is some of these have stuck. I don't know whether you can see, it's like chocolate there and it's not red there. So when they came out of the mold, you see all that cocoa butter that's left in the mold. And so that's often overworking. So you know when we're saying go in with the thumb, you only want to go in once and stop. You don't want to rework it, because what happens is you start to over-crystallize the cocoa butter and it ends up sticking in the mold, and that's not good. And it's a real shame because, you know, like, especially with students, they get very over-enthusiastic, and so they're really, really working inside that mold because they want to get lots of colour in there. And when they turn it out, half of the cocoa butter sticks to like the inside of the mold, and that's not good. And again, when we're doing the Easter eggs, that's really important as well. So when you're brushing with the brush at the back, don't overbrush it either, because again, all of that extra work, extra movement is crystallizing your cocoa butter. So that's our chocolate molds. I've got two little ones here there, if you go down. So these ones, they were just with a sponge. So just the same kind of thing, but instead of doing with my finger, we've just got a little piece of sponge, we've dipped it into the white and dabbed into the mold, and then dipped the red in there and dabbed into the mold as well. Dipped and dabbed, yeah. Yeah. So another great technique when you're looking at decoration is taping. So if we taped off sections of this egg and then we flicked and we brushed and things like that, we can create different colors. Because I could flick and do some cocoa butter, and then I can pull the tape off, and then I can brush with the gold or the shimmer, so that you get different layers coming up again. So we have, we use frog tape, but you can use anything. But what you're looking for is low tack. So you're looking for something that doesn't really stick to the mold and doesn't leave any sticky residue on there either, because if you get that sticky residue and then you put your chocolate on there, that's not very good either. So any of the low tack ones are really good. So you can see, you know, it's quite nice, but it's not that sticky. We also get another one, which there's hardly any left, but it's a blue one and it's really thin. And this one is from a company called Jammy Dog. And it's online, and they do different thicknesses, and these are for ceramic work. So, you know, when they're doing lines on like vases and things like that, they would use this low tack tape. So you can use them as well. So we can tape the tape and we can put it into our mold. But you've got to be really careful, because it's really, and this as well, you know, when you see people that do chocolates doing this, I mean, it takes hours to get all those lines neatly into the chocolate molds. But you want to, this has got a shape, hasn't it? It's got a curve. So when you put it in, you want to place it down and just nick it on the edge there, and then really press in gently. And don't get your fingers onto the shiny mold. You only want the fingers on the tape. But you see, what I'm looking for now is, do I have any little bits that aren't stuck? So like there isn't stuck, and any extra cocoa butter could get in there, especially if I'm spraying. So you really want to make sure that it's really stuck to the surface. Because there's nothing worse than thinking you're going to get a totally straight line, and then actually when you pull it off, you've had bleeding and it's gone underneath, and then it just ruins the effect. So this one, we've taped up. Oh, there we go. We've taped up. So we've got different thicknesses of the tape. But here as well, can you see these bits that are on the edge? Because if you do it just to the edge there, when you fill that shell with chocolate, it doesn't actually, you can't see it. Do you know what I mean? So you're really struggling. So always make sure that you leave a little bit at the top here that you can pull it out. And then we would decorate and we would spray, and then we wouldn't leave that tape on there. We would move it straight away. So you can flick in there. So this time I'll use the black because that one's the one I can see the best. Add some paper. Mm-hmm.
Do you sort of polish it, or do you use alcohol to get rid of the fingerprints?
Yeah, while it's at this stage, you could polish it to get rid of the fingerprints. You know, like if I stuck my finger in there because I'm trying to put the tape down and I got some fingers, I could. But as soon as you start to put cocoa butter or any colouring into it, you can't do that anymore. And if something goes wrong with the cocoa butter, you know, like the temptation is to rub out that cocoa butter, or, you know, like just get a piece of paper and take it out. But that really leaves a mark in the shell, so that's no good either. You're almost better off starting again and washing it. Don't try and erase it and then put something on the back of it. So I'm just going to do the same with this cocoa butter. I'm just going to give it a little movement. Flicks already. So I'm just going to give it some movement. But this time, I'm going to do longer flicks. So normally I would hold this up. I might get it at the camera. So you want to flick down. And so that you start to get the lines. You see the lines coming from the flick? Claire, do you get any? I'm sorry. So you start to get, you get the longer lines. It's a bit like Jackson Pollock or something like that. So again, you could do that in all sorts of different colours, which is really good. You can also use sponges, makeup sponges. So, you know, like these ones that we've got that are triangles on the edge, or a really thin bit on the edge, or a long side. You can use those, dipping them in cocoa butter as well, and then pressing them into the mould. So again, this one's got a round edge, this one's got a smooth edge. So it just depends what you want. So I'm going to go with the round. I'm just going to dip in. And then you would just press into the mould. And you can get some really cool different shapes happening. So we're going very black and white here. I think this one should be a white egg. And then I could let that set. And then once that's set, I need to brush it with something to shimmer. But now I have got a fault happening here, Claire, if you can go top down. So you see where it's too thick. And this is one that happens all the time. People put things on and then it starts to run. And especially if you try and pipe in there, you know, you try and pipe blobs in there, they often run. So that one there, I wanted it to be like that. Can you see that it's starting to run? And also, can you see there that that cocoa butter is actually quite thick? Now, again, that can be a problem. So if I go, I'll just show you taking this off. So now I want to, I'll let it set and then I'll brush the shimmer on the back. But if we go to some that we did earlier, these ones, we try to make them have too thicker cocoa butter on there. And there's only one of them that worked. This one, okay. So this one here, the cocoa butter in the middle there was really thick. And so what's happened is some of it hasn't crystallized properly, and I've got blobs missing of the cocoa butter. You see, they're missing them there. And that often happens when you get really thick amounts of cocoa butter. But then also you can see that it gets left in the shell. It's not very good. So again, if we'd done lots of these that were really thick, all of that could have stuck in that shell. So again, you want it to be just enough, just nice and thin, that you get the nice lines, but not too thick, because otherwise it sticks. and they were all nice and thin, so they were okay. And we've got another egg. So this one is one Claire made yesterday. And what you can see is we've done the flicks there. So we've done the yellow flick and then we've done the pink flick. Lots and lots of flicks. It's not really showing up so well on here, but we can really see that this was a dirty mould. So when we've demolded it, it hasn't got that beautiful, really clear shine. It's got a bit of a dull, and I can see streaks and lines on there, which is really not nice. So again, we wouldn't be happy with that. I mean, I know to you it looks fine, but. And then this one is extremely bad. So this one has been over crystallized. So you know when we talked about the over crystallizing of the chocolate, this one's there. So if I look around the edge, I'll show you the edge. I'll just put some gloves on. If I show you the edge, we know that this is tempered chocolate. So we can see the edge. We've got a shine on the edge there. But this is really thick. And can you see inside there as well? That's another fault. So when we often make Easter eggs, we turn them over because we want that lip to form around the edge of the Easter egg. But if you turned it over and you left it sitting there for quite a while, under this dome, it's creating its own heat. Because as all those crystals link together, they're causing a latent heat, and it untempers itself under there. So if you look on the top here, it looks all right, and we can still see some chocolate through it. But if you look underneath, that is just totally white, and that is totally untempered chocolate. And the chocolate did that to itself because we left it turned over and it got too hot underneath and it started to untemper itself. So it's a very poorly egg. But we know it's tempered. It's got if I snapped it, it would have a great snap. And we can see shine around the edge, so we know it's shiny. So this bit of grey is real over-crystallization. Yes. Yeah. So if we melted that back again, it would be totally okay. Because again, if we melt it down, we're getting rid of all the crystals, aren't we? So we're taking it back to nothing. So we're getting rid of the crystals, and then we're starting to reform them, and we're reforming them into the shape that we want, the beta-5 crystal. So yeah, that's fine. So with this one now, it's set. So I'm just going to get some of that shimmer again. And I'm going to go on to the back. And then I'm going to take off my tape. So you can see it covers really quickly with these makeup brushes. What you always need to be careful of as well is the top edges. Because when you put that egg together, if you haven't done this top edge and you stick the two together, you end up with a gap, and the gap's not very good. So right up to the top. Then I'm going to tap it out to get rid of any excess. And then also, again, just give it a bit of a clean around the edge. And then we take the tape off. So then you can peel it. Mm-hmm. I'm peeling it slowly. And so this one, you know, when I said, if you don't get your tape totally down, you'll see the bleeding. So can you see along the edges, we've got bits where it's going down. And I've got my little bit there as well. So you need to really make sure that one's nice, because that one was really stuck down nice and tight. So I think what we find the worst thing is people spend so long on the decoration, and then, you know, like if it goes wrong at the end, you've done all the decoration, you've done all the lining and all the rest of it, and then when you turn it out and it's wrong, it's really heartbreaking to see that they're so upset. So it is really key, if you're ever going to use that taping, you really need to make sure that it's totally stuck down and that you've really pressed on it, so you haven't got any little bits where anything can get underneath it. And also, when you're putting the cocoa butter in, don't put too thick cocoa butter in. It's better to build up in thin layers. So if you wanted something that was more dense, you could go back onto it and add another layer, but don't do one thick layer thinking that that's going to give you a really dense colour, because it doesn't. It just ends up uncrystallising. Okay.
Okay, question from Matt. What can we use to give an intense shine to your chocolate? So he went to New York last year, lucky man, and he went to a chocolate shop with the most amazing chocolates with the most immense shine.
Well, were they just plain chocolates? Were they, you know, like, is it just chocolate shell that was nice and shiny? Because that is the most difficult thing to do. You know, like, we had all these shimmers and these cocoa butters and things like that, and that gives us a really good shine. But if you're just going to get an egg that's nothing on it, a plain shell, we're always amazed when you see them really shiny. Now, people do spray like a chocolate lacquer on it to give it that shine, but that's not very good. We don't like that. But that will give it that really high intense shine. Or people, if they just wanted an egg, and, you know, we're just going to use white chocolate, milk chocolate, dark chocolate, they often spray the mold first. So they would get some milk chocolate and they would put it in with some cocoa butter and they would temper it, and then they would spray it into the mold, and that gives it, that extra cocoa butter gives it that extra shine. So you end up with this really beautiful high gloss. And sometimes people do that even so, you know, even if they're going to put like the flick decoration, they'll put the flick decoration on, and then if it was just going to be a plain chocolate on the back of it, they would again put some chocolate into some cocoa butter, temper it, and then spray it. So you get a lovely high shine finish to it. But it is all about the crystallization, whichever way we look at it, whether it's the cocoa butters, whether it's chocolate, whatever it is, you need that cocoa butter to be crystallized so you get that high shine finish on it. Now, the other thing we've been experimenting with is people have been saying, well, I actually do my decoration into my molds and then I leave them overnight and I let that cocoa butter crystallize, and then I come back the next day and I shell it and I get a better shine. And we've done that, Claire, haven't we? We've experimented with it and it did actually come out a lot shinier. So we did some that we just did them and then shelled them, and then we left one in the fridge overnight, brought it back out, brought it back up to room temperature, and then shelled it. And there was a definite difference in there. But then it's also to do with the temperature of the cocoa butters, especially if you're spraying. Because if you're going to spray cocoa butter and you temper it, and say you temper it to 30 degrees, by the time it's gone through the gun and it's gone through the spray and it's actually hit the mold, it's actually most probably only going to be about 27, 28. So it's too cold, really. So again, when we're spraying, we need to get that sweet point where it's tempered, 32, 33, but by the time it's gone through the gun and gone onto that mold, that we've got it the really nice temperature. And so therefore we get that lovely shine. So it is really complicated. Other people say that you should always mix your cocoa butters colours and then spray in the mould, because they reckon spraying is shinier. But we don't see that. We see that when you do the thumb or when you do anything that gives it really close movement to that shell, we actually get a high shine, even just with chocolate. So, you know, if we've got white chocolate or milk chocolate and we put that into the shell first of all, and then backed it with the dark chocolate, you'll still get a really nice shine coming off that chocolate because it's really knitted to that shell that we put it into. Okay, so just another thing to show you to think about. This one is when we are shelling our chocolates, we do have to think about what we're putting into it. Because if we were going to use caramel is really quite, it wants to come out of the shell. Whatever it can do to get out of the shell, it will do. So when we're doing caramels, we always shell it thicker than if we are doing a normal one. So if we go top down, you can see, yeah. So you can see this side, lovely thin shell. That's what we'd expect if we were eating a nice ganache and something like that. That's great. This side here, we would use that if we were going to do with the caramel. And also, milk chocolates are often better because the milk chocolate never sets as hard as dark chocolate. So therefore, if there's any little holes or anything like that around here, it's not going to find its way out as easy if it's milk chocolate as if it was dark chocolate. So another thing to say is you can go too thin. So again, if you get your shells and they're super, super, super thin, what you find is you don't get any contraction from the shell because there's not enough chocolate there to be able to contract itself. So some people are really proud of their shells and they're like, oh my God, look, they're so wonderful. But when they go to tap them out again, they just won't come out the shell and they end up sticking right at the top. And again, that's heartbreaking because they've done a beautiful job, really, but they haven't left themselves enough chocolate in there to contract slightly away from the shell, because that's what we need to happen. So one last thing, we're just going to show you the backing off of the chocolates. And Claire's going to get me some chocolate in a piping bag. So when we back the chocolates, and can I get some acetate to put it onto? You can back them just normally. So we would just get some chocolate and we would pour it over the top and we would scrape it off. I'm going to show you that one. And that's really good. And it's what most people would do. But also, if you wanted to add a pattern or if you wanted to add your logo or something like that, you can add a transfer sheet on the back. Doesn't have to be a transfer. It could just be a plain piece of plastic. But what that's going to do is that's going to give you a much shinier base. So the top of your chocolate has a lovely shine to it and the base of your chocolate has a lovely shine to it. Also, if you've got something that's a softer filling, so if you had a real soft caramel, then it's often better to back it this way with the plastic than without the plastic. It just gives it a bit more security when you're doing it. So take off the stickers. And another thing to think about, Claire's filled these. Some of these are really, really full. So when I go to scrape across it, I'm most probably going to scrape the chocolate off there and you're just going to get left with ganache. And that, again, you're going to see it would be no good for the shelf life. Thank you. Now, normally I would scrape back into a tank, but because we don't have a tank here, I'm just going to do it straight onto the pin film. Thank you. Right, so I've got my tempered chocolate. And so I'm just going to, I wouldn't necessarily use a piping bag either, for just doing it with this way. I would just use my spoon or whatever I've got, you know, like in my tank. So I just need to smooth it, make sure I've got the top end covered, and then I'm just going to give it some pressure. I'm not going to go that way because you kind of judder down the thing. I'm going to go that way. It's much smoother, she says, talking too much. So I'm going to go down. Scrape off the sides. I need my tank. But then I'm just going to turn around and I'm just going to go quite hard over it so that I get a nice clean surface. And actually, all of those are covered quite well, so that's good. And then we're going to leave them. Now, if I just keep going backwards and forwards over these, what I end up doing is really messing up the top surface of that chocolate, and then you're not going to get a lovely clean finish on there. So you need to do it once, have a check. If everything's okay, good, leave it. If there's any little holes, turn it round and do it again. That's it, leave it then. To pour over the first three. The hole's a little bit big. And then I'm going to get my sheet of acetate and I'm going to place it down. So again, I know that I've sealed the end there. And then I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to put a lot of pressure this time. So I want a lot of pressure as I'm pulling down. So what I can see is a nice clean surface on the top there. And then again, I'm just going to scrape off any excess into my tank that isn't here. And then that's really great, because then we put that into the fridge and we leave it. And again, if you're putting that into like a 5-degree fridge or something like that, we need to leave it for a minute outside so it starts to set, then put it into the fridge. But we're not going to get any humidity on the back of our chocolates because we've covered them. So again, it's a bit of a safety net if you're having to use 5-degree fridges rather than the 10 degrees chocolate fridges. And also keeps it nice and sealed. So then once we've finished with it, we get a nice transfer sheet, and then all you've got to do is pull it off and you end up with the transfer on the back of the chocolates. And they look really quite cool. And then we've had them out here, Claire. So I'm just giving the chocolate mold a bit of a twist, and then I'm going to turn it over and tap them out. So you see these ones just had the shimmer on them, and they look beautiful, don't they? So that one was even easier. We didn't have to do any patterns or anything like that. We just brushed the shimmer into the mold. And so there we go. We've got some beautiful bronzed chocolates, but then on the base we have the little transfer sheet, which again, in a box of chocolates would be quite nice, because you can actually do one row this way up and then one row that way up, and they're the same chocolates, but it gives you a different effect. So yes. So any more questions, Claire? Right, well, I think we're at the end of our little session for today. So again, if you've got any questions on the ganaches, or if you've got a recipe that starts splitting and you want some help with it, you can always ask us and we can have a look at it for you. But also, you know, like if you want to work out your own ganaches and what's happening and the shelf lives, that Jean-Pierre Wybauw book is really good. It's got loads of theory in there. And if you read that, you can start to work stuff out for yourself. It's really good. If you are going to start selling chocolates as a shop for the college, you do need to think about the shelf life. So again, you could use one of the recipes out of the Jean-Pierre Wybauw book, because that's given you the AW reading and it has given you an indication on the shelf life. So again, you would have the confidence to say that that raspberry ganache or that rum truffle or whatever has got a really good shelf life. And yeah, it's just to have a think about the whole thing, and also to tell your students that, because we have so many small businesses opening up at the moment, you know, especially with the lockdown. Everybody's suddenly a baker, everybody wants to be a chocolatier, and they're all starting from home and then just starting to sell their goods online, and they don't necessarily know about this. So again, we get lots of phone calls and people go, "What? I need to think about shelf life?" Like, yeah, it would be a good idea, because you know, we don't want any bad products going out into the market and hurting people. So shelf life, very important. And again, with the techniques, Mark is going to do some more techniques on Thursday. So he's going to show a lot more of the colouring and a lot more shimmering and decoration techniques that we would use if we were going to do our showpieces. So I think he's going to show you some different bases, some different structures, and then some flowers as well. So that's taking on the decoration to another level. And we've also got all of our pre-recorded now live streams that we've done. And again, there's been some decoration live streams, and there's been a Christmas showpiece, and we did baubles. But all of those have those same decoration techniques in them. So again, even though you're not going to do a Christmas bauble, you could still show your students those techniques and then apply them to chocolate molds or Easter egg molds. So we hope you have fun. And you get to play around with some of these techniques. And as always, if we can be of any help, just let us know. And thank you very much for joining us.